Um, Dude wanted me to tell you this. We noticed that a lot of people are saying that we're going too fast. Uh, if we're in class and you think we're going too fast, please speak up and tell us we're going too fast. But even if you don't, remember Newman is recording every single class, so you can always rewatch it and at the speed you want. All right. So let's get started. Today we're going to be going over events, and that's it. But events are super useful, so hopefully you'll learn something
Bro,
cool you can do with them.
that's the most boring 2 hours of my life.
Bro, it's basic. Come on, man.
That's what I mean. That's what I mean. That's what I mean.
This is a basic class. Like, if you don't like it, then get out of here.
I'm just watching on YouTube because you seem like
I need to get the
people
gown, bro.
have it
I
on
need
one
to get the
ear.
gown. I gotta look drippy on my dream gown. You know what
Oh,
All right.
you want the gown?
Here
I mean? Yeah, I want the gown.
here are the events.
What are those?
Good to see you, Badger.
Let's start right here in the middle though.
What are those?
These
Trust me, you wish you would.
are custom events. Up
Trust
top
me.
we got a event definition,
I've
and the
never seen that shit
event
before.
definition defines events. So like you can't just randomly run an event that's never been made or defined in anywhere. So to make an
Can you just
event,
mute me, buddy?
you place down a event definition, then configure it, and you can name your event whatever you want. I'll just call it like um test event. No, that's confusing. There's another thing. I'll call it just test. All right. And when I submit it, this now says test on it. Do y'all see that?
Mhm.
Yeah, sure.
Then, if I configure a event receiver, I can receive that event, and I can go through the menu on the configure menu, and you all can follow with me with your own event definitions and stuff. I can find tests, and so now this event receiver is linked with that definition, and I can do the same thing on a event sender test, and now these two events are synchronized, like they go together. So if I place a button and a beacon, in this case I'll just connect the output of the receiving event to turn off this beacon and the sender to the press of this button. So now when I press this button, it'll send an event and it'll receive it and turn off this beacon.
Oh my god.
Does that make sense? Just pretty basic events. Then
So the receivers all have to be the same name in order to be linked. Is that what you're saying?
yes, for it to be linked, it'll be the same name. However, you don't have to like memorize what you wrote because it'll be like in the configure menu, and you can just select all your defined events. If does that make sense? Yeah. All right. Another neat thing you can do is configure the event definition and add different ports to it. So I'm gonna add a boolean, and I'm gonna call it on, and I'm gonna add that property. And now you can see on my event sender and receiver, I now have a boolean port on it. So now by using this send event, when the button is pressed going into here, I'll have it turn on. So I'll set that to true. And when it's released, I'll set it to false, which will in turn turn off this beacon. So now on the receiving end, let me place this over here. I'm going to grab a beacon enabled chip, which is already inside of a beacon, but remember it's its own chip as well. So beacon set enable, just like that. And now I'll connect this to on, and I'll set the target to this beacon. So now, when I click pressed on this button, it turns on the beacon, and when I release it, it turns off. Does everyone understand why that works? Yep.
No, what's the beacon set enabled for?
Beacon set enabled is what is turning on and off the beacon. So it's referred to as enabled or disabled. So when it's right now it's disabled and it looks like it's off. When it's enabled, it looks like it's on. You know?
Okay.
All right. Who wants to go over these?
Me.
So in the last few months, we have a relatively new set of events that are all related to locomotion. Locomotion is the process of moving your character throughout the environment, jumping over objects, walking around, clambering up ledges, and such. And we have events. We have events now that will fire when most of these things happen. So just to go down the list, we have event receiver on player clamber started. But by the way, these events are all available at the global graph. So if you just go into a room and you're not in a circuit board or anything, they'll also be available in circuit boards and anywhere else, but they're also just available at the very top level. So firstly, we have on player clamber started. This will run. The little orange exec will actually fire, and it will have a player port of who is doing the clambering. Clambering is when, like, if you have a cube and you jump up against the edge, and you know how your character like pulls itself up off the edge, like Rylogix is doing it there. You get like pulled up onto the edge and plays that little sound. That's clambering. So this will run every time anybody in the room does that, and it'll tell you who's doing it. On player grounded. So similarly, this will run when a player in the room is grounded. It has first an exec. Every event has an exec. So if you have an event, the first one will always be an execution. And then there's the player that is being grounded, the surface they're grounding on, and then the position that they're grounding at. So if I were to land like this, it would run once. The player port would be will chill. The surface would be whatever rec room object this thing I'm standing on is, and the position would be a vector 3 where my feet are. Moving on, there's on player jumped. This is very similar to player grounded. It has that exec, the player port, surface, and position. I actually haven't used this, so I'm not exactly sure what surface is, but I'm assuming it's the surface that they were standing on when they jumped. So like the surface they're jumping off of. On player landed, that's pretty much just the opposite of jumping. First they jump, that one runs, and then they land, and it runs player landed. On player slide, I'm sure you all know what a slide is, just like this. So that'll run anytime a player slides, and it has the exec and the player. On player sprint started, this also just has an exec and a player port, and this, as the name implies, just runs whenever you start sprinting. Sprint stopped, similarly, it just runs when you stop sprinting. On player fly started, I'm sure you all know what that does, just starts running, just runs once when you go into fly mode. So as soon as I do this, and I'm flying around. Fly stop, that's just when you stop flying. On player wall climb started. This is like when you go into climbing mode, so like this wall isn't climbable, but if it was, I could like grab it with my hand and start climbing up it. And that would start running that chip as soon as I start climbing. And wall run started. So that's just when you do wall run, like if you're in Stunt Runner or something. We have a couple more. Player grabbed object and released object. The outputs of these chips are similar. They have their exec ports. They have the player who is grabbing or releasing the object, and they have the object that is being grabbed or released. We have, these three here are extremely useful. First, there's player joined. This will run as soon as a player joins your room. It'll run for everybody. So if you only want it to run for like the actual player that's joining, you'd put another chip after that, like if player is local. That involves networking. We're going to get more to that tomorrow. Yeah, so don't worry about that just yet. Next, we have player leaving. This event will run the very last moment before your client will actually like disconnect the player from the room. So when this runs, you'll see there's a player output port. This is the player that's leaving. Everybody else in the room will run it. The player who's leaving themselves won't get this, and they also won't get the next one. But everyone else will run this, and they'll have the player port. This player port, when this event runs, will be valid. You can do things like check tags or check roles on the player that's leaving. In contrast to this next one, event receiver player left, this runs immediately after this one. So this is when they start leaving. This is when they have already left. So there are like some specific instances where it's important which one you want to use. For instance, the player count will be lower in this one. It'll be one lower than it was when this one ran. So if you want to do something with the current set of players after they've left, this is where you do that. If you want to read some information about the player that left, you do that here. You'll see that player left still has a player port, even though that player is guaranteed to be invalid. So if I try to do something like player set position to wherever I am, that wouldn't work because the player isn't valid here. So you might be wondering, why is there a player port here if you can't do anything with it? Well, even though it's invalid, it still does reference that player. So you can, if you took that player before they left and you saved it into a variable chip, like a player variable, and then you used the equals chip and you compared the player you had in that variable chip with the player running here, it would actually know whether or not it was them. So if you had some, like for instance, like you have some tag game, the person who's like it when they're playing tag, if you save them into a variable, you could check if it was them, and if it was, you could like reassign whoever is in that role to somebody else. Down here, these are also extremely useful chips. Room loaded. This runs once per room. As soon as you enter the room, it'll just run for the authority player, because like if you think about loading up a room, it gets created as soon as the first person enters. So only one player is in it, and they're guaranteed to be authority. Authority is something we'll get to in networking tomorrow. Not too important right now. So if you had, for instance, like a text component and you wanted to show the current date on the wall, you could load that into the event receiver. So you'd say event receiver room loaded, and then you'd have some logic to set a text component to the date. And then that would just be set for the rest of the instance. I believe this also runs if you do a room save, but that's usually not too important. There's also, so does this run if you do a room save, or is that just reset? It does? Okay, cool. There's also room reset. So similarly to room loaded, this will rerun if you do a room save. But more importantly, there is a reset room chip. Let me pull that out, that you can run that will actually manually do a reset. And this is what it looks like. You'll notice this is one of only 2 chips in the game to not have an execute output port. That's because as soon as you run this and you do a room reset, all the circuits stop and the room reset will run until it's completed. So for instance, if you have like a beacon and you change the color to be blue, and then you run room reset, it'll revert back to whatever the color was when you first loaded into the game, when you first loaded into the room. And if you have a variable chip, it'll reset it to the default value. It'll change everything back to be as it was when you first joined the room. Specifically things that you change with circuits. Anything you change with maker pen will comes back. There's also, while we're talking about room reset, there's a reset object chip, whereas this will reset every object in the room and every circuit. You can also reset specific objects. So if I just wanted to reset this beacon, for example, I would reset object chip and I'd wire the beacon reference into that, and I could just reset the beacon while everything else would be the same. We have update 30 hertz. This 30 hertz just means per second. So this is going to run 30 times per second. So for instance, if I wanted a clock that was just showing the current time really fast, like with like minutes, seconds, and then like decimal seconds, that would update like as fast as this can go. There's a delta time output on here. This is how many seconds has passed since the last time this ran. Now, given that it says 30 hertz, you might just think that the delta time is exactly a 30th of a second, and it's going to run, and every time it runs, that's going to be the same value. This is actually how it used to be. That was a bug. But now it actually is accurate. We'll actually get like the real time on your computer that it has been since the last time that ran. And the reason it isn't exactly 30 hertz is because like if your computer is lagging, for instance, it might not run quite as fast, especially if you're on like Quest or like mobile or something where like the hardware is kind of constrained, but that's usually not an issue. It'll just run as fast as it can, and things will update pretty well. Also, we have test event. So this normally you don't really use this in circuits unless, like as the name implies, you're testing something, because the only way you can activate it is with your maker pen. So if you take out your maker pen and you go to the tools section, the little tools tab on the bottom, Doobin's going to be putting it up on the board. If you go to your tools tab and you go to circuits and debugging, you'll see two things here. There's send test event, and then right below that is test event parameter. So if I hit the send test event button, this event receiver here will run. It will take this orange exec and that'll run whatever it's connected to. And this orange parameter, I mean this purple parameter port will have the value of whatever you type into the test event parameter field. So for instance, you could type like a player name, and then you run send test event, and when this runs, parameter will have that name. And then for instance, you could have chips that would convert the name into the player and then do whatever you want with them. You can teleport them somewhere or mute them or whatever. But since this is only available through the maker pen, I usually only use it either for testing, or you could even use it for like room moderation. So if like all the mods in your room have a maker pen, they have maker pen access, you could put like some sort of like moderation system so they can access it through there without having to like go to a wall to hit an object. Do you have something to say, Snug?
It has to do with room reset, because I don't think you mentioned it. If you go back to where it says test event on the maker pen, and Duman can show it on his, under circuits and debugging, right under the test event stuff, there's a button called send room reset, where you can send your own room reset without needing that room reset chip, you know?
Yeah, right here. And to answer your question around Logix, it's the same instance. Nobody will change. Nobody will go through a loading screen. It'll just reset everything in the instance you're currently in.
For except for stuff that was like changed at all with a maker pen, except weirdly for stuff that was cloned. If you cloned it in an instance, it bugs and like goes back to the object you cloned it from. It's really annoying. So just be aware of that when you're room resetting.
Looks like we have a few more locomotion events. So here's player footstep event. So this, as the name implies, will run every time the game tries to make a footstep sound effect. So like when I'm walking, it's making footstep noises. If you want to just, I think there's a role setting to disable footstep sounds. So you could potentially use this to make your own custom footstep sounds. If you wire this to a chip called like play audio at position, for example, it takes like an audio recording, just like plays at a position. You presumably do it like at their foot position. And there's also surface. This is the object they're walking on, and position, that's just where it is. On player crouch started, as the name implies, this just runs as soon as the player starts crouching down. So just like this. Clamber started. I think we have that down twice. Yeah, so that just runs when you start clambering. Player prone started. So that just runs as soon as you go prone. So as soon as you lay down, that'll run. It has a reference to the player. And lastly, on player stand started. So that's just if you were crouching or if you were prone and then you go back up, that'll run there and give you the player who is doing it. Cool.
Next, we're going to go over the player definition board and its events, but I'm now realizing that our events are severely outdated because we made these before custom locomotion. So give me a second. Will, do you want to go over do you want to do the example now?
I'm still finalizing what that's going to be. Do you have anything to go over, Ducky? We could go over like event scope, things inside components.
Oh, yeah, that's smart. Do you want to do that, Ducky?
Are you there, Ducky? Ducky, are you there? Not sure you can hear us.
All right, Will, you
might
can
be
just do
lagging
that.
out. Okay, Snug, come up with an example.
All right.
Okay, so I briefly touched on this earlier, but events have a scope, and scope just refers to the circuit board or like the place that they're accessible within. So right now, every chip you're looking at here, this is considered it's inside the global scope, or you could call it the global graph. A graph just refers to a series of chips and wires. So what Snug is about to show you is chips inside the player definition board. That is its own scope, and within that board, there are special events that are only available inside there. So Newman's going to open up this board here for the button, and you'll be able to see some events inside of it in a second. Cool. So you can see that there are a couple events in it. There is the event receiver pressed and event receiver released. These two events are only available inside the button. You might see similarly named events elsewhere, but they're technically different events. And like as the names imply, they will run when you press it, and then the release will run when you release it. So that kind of like the way it knows to run is because it looks at which object board it's inside of. It knows it's inside of a button board, and it knows that it can run when you interact with the object that object board is associated with. So like it wouldn't make sense to have those events outside of the board, which is why they're only available in there. Similarly, with custom events that Snug went over at the start, we have this test event here. The scope of events is defined by the location of the definition chip. So these chips down here, the sender and receiver, these are at the same scope. Like you can see them both in the same place. They're both at the global circuit graph. So these chips will have the test event available to it. If I were to select this test chip and put it inside of a circuit board and leave these here, these chips would become unbound. They would be undefined now because they don't have an event definition at the same scope. On the other hand, though, if I were to take both of these chips and I were to put them in a circuit board and leave the test the test event definition here, these ones would still work, because if you have chips referencing an event in a scope that is a child of the definition chip, it's still valid. Event definitions are valid after there's definition scope and all child scopes of that definition. There's a few other events, like most components have events. We have some back there. Let me grab some. So these are pretty much all the components that have affiliated object boards. So most of the time, the events will just be wired out through the object board, so you won't have to touch them directly if you're just looking like at the board. So you can see here there's a like unseat player. Hold on, let me check which ones exactly are running events. Yeah, so seated player changed right here. In like you can't see it internally, but it doesn't really matter. It's just an event receiver. Internally, there is a event that runs when the seated player changes, and that just gets routed out through here. So there's one for seats. There's a similar event for the costume dummy. When a player equips it or unequips it, there are events inside of it that will run that are only available inside the full body costume dummy. The trigger volume, this like basically the entire use of this object is to provide a place for events to run. So there is one event for when the player enters, tells you which player is entering. There's a similar one for when they exit. And then there are two more for objects entering or exiting. They give you a reference to the Rec Room object. Trigger handles have a good amount of events inside. They have events for when you either pick it up or when you drop it. You'll notice we went over before, there are global scope events for when a player picks something up or drops it that will run for everybody. So that, like, those events are completely valid. These kind of do a similar thing, but if you're only looking like at the trigger handle, like you don't care what else they're picking up, these would probably be a little bit easier to use. Also, there are primary action pressed and primary action released events. So those will run when you hold down the trigger or when you let it go. There's a throw handle. Pick up and release.
I think that.
aren't
Yeah, I
through
was
the
gonna say
board
the
here,
object board
but
is
those will
outdated.
also run when you pick it up or drop it.
Let me try something.
Change this board. Okay.
If
But
I delete it and create it.
unlike
does it
the
do
trigger
more?
handle, what this one does have is an on-throw port. It should, yeah. Okay, cool. Yeah, it looks like they added it to the new board. Yeah, so it's got the pick up and release, and it's got the on-throw. This has the direction. This is a vector 3. It's like basically a vector. Imagine it's like starting at your hand and pointing, going out in the direction that you threw the object. And then it has just like a float speed port. This is just the speed in meters per second that you made that throw at. There's also a swing handle. So this is how the hammer that Bonky holds works. It's what allows players to swing objects like when they're not on VR. And similar to the other two types of handles, it has pickup and release events that will run as you'd expect when you pick up or release it. But also it has a new set of events: on swing start, on swing update, and on swing end. So imagine you're holding this and you go and you make a swing. It will first run the on swing start. It'll run this exactly once. Then every frame until you reach the end of the swing, it will run on swing update. So this will go really fast. You can think of it kind of like a 30 while you're swinging it. And then there's on swing end. So this will run once as soon as you finish that swing. We have interaction volume. This is just like the thing you can click on if you've ever seen that before. Yeah, Relogix. All of these chips support haptics chips, but we can get to that later. This interaction volume has a ton of events as well. On use or hold completed, on hold canceled, on hold start, on hold update, on hold end, on hover start, on hover end, and yeah, I think those are all the events. So those will run. The names kind of suggest what it is. Like when you look at it and it turns green, that's like I'm hovering starting, and then if I move my hand, it's hover end. This is an interaction volume V2, so it supports like holding it as the little like radial dial fills up over some amount of time. So there's on hold update similar to the swing handle that will run every frame that you're like still holding on to it, and then there's an on hold start and on hold end, which will run like when you start and finish holding it. And then cancel, that's like if you let go before the timer fills up. Already went over the button. The toggle button is very similar to the button. I think it actually has the exact same event pressed and released. It's just that being a toggle button rather than a regular button, you can't like manually hold it. It's pressed until you press it again, and then it runs the released event. These are extremely new. This is as of the last update. Or at least most prop weapons, most ranged prop weapons have a set of events inside them that are kind of similar to the projectile launcher and the handles. There's a pickup event. There's a release event. Most of the events actually aren't available here on the board, but like if you want, you can open it up and spawn them in. There is a gun fired event that will run like every time you like pull the trigger and shoot it. And there are also reload events. So this is a paintball pistol, which of course you can't if you've ever played paintball before, but it's the same type of object. So like hover over the self port, it's telling me it's a ranged weapon, like this little yellow thing right here. So it shares like an object board type with every other prop weapon. So like the laser tag pistol, for example, which you can reload. So if you're in a laser tag pistol and you reload it, it will run reload start. And then when you finish, it'll run reload completed. There's also a reload canceled if for instance, you're on VR and you let go before you finish reloading, or if you're on screen and you drop it before you finish reloading. And most importantly, there is an object hit event, and there's also player hit events. There's a bunch of hit events inside it, which will run when the bullet that you shot out of it has hit something. So if I take out the pistol and I shoot somebody and the paintball hits them, it will run player hit. If I shoot it at the ground and I hit the ground, it'll run an object event. These events include things like the position and the object or player. It's actually stored in a format called collision data, which basically just like encodes some of these properties into a single port. But that's not too important. We can get to that later, or let me know if anybody has questions. And also there's an any hit, which will run if anything is hit. So a lot of these things, like if you hit a player or an object, those are separate events. But if like no matter what you hit, the any event is guaranteed to run. We have the gun handle, which is similar to the other handles that has pickup and release. As you can see, there are a ton of ports on here. Most of these aren't too important, like just for like an introductory class, but there's things like reloading, start, completed, and canceled, identically to the pistol I just went over. And then there's like things involving reloading. If you want to make a custom gun, you can let me know if you have any questions.
Think of it as like a
Cool. And I
advanced
think that's
trigger
all the
handle.
main events. Yeah, exactly.
All right. So now we'll go to the player definition board. Did anyone have any questions? Yes, Relogics.
A handle haptic.
A handle haptic, like vibrates your controller, and it only works on VR, even though like PlayStation and Xbox has like haptics and like phones, it only works on VR. But the thing, if you guys are curious, that he's talking about, if I can find it, it's called handle haptic. I'm pretty sure. I've used this maybe once, but you can connect it to these three handles. Are you able to do it on the gun handle? And the gun handle. So the trigger handle, throw handle, swing handle, and gun handle, anything that says handle, they all have like a consistent type of port called handle, and that lets you connect it to all the handles. And what happens is when you run it, it'll vibrate your controller if you're on VR and won't do anything on any other platform, with whatever the intensity is that you set for the duration that you set with a integer in milliseconds. So like 100 would be 1 second. All right. Now let's go to the player definition board. And Relogics, did that clear up what that did? All right. Do you want to move these back? Move this too. And do man, if you want, you can take a copy of the player definition board so you can show people what's in it. Actually, I have a genius solution. You can edit this one. I have one right behind it. Alright. Alright, so does everyone remember what Will, the one in front? Do the one in front. I'll do the one behind. Alright, so I'm hoping you all remember what Will was just telling you about with the hierarchy with circuit boards. Where events outside of a circuit board won't like be seen outside of the circuit board, but they will be seen inside of it. Much like how there's default events in like the world scope, there are a ton of player specific events inside of the player definition board. So I guess we'll start over here on the far left. We have
So
player
you should explain
grabbed.
what the player definition board is.
Okay, so a player definition board is pretty much a circuit board, but like, or an object board, but for players. So every player has their own player definition board, and the events inside of them usually run for everyone, but the way of how you know who it is running for is based off of who the player definition board is for. Does that make sense? I hope it did.
Can you say that one more time?
Yeah. So a player definition board is like an object board, but for players, and like every single player has their own object definition board, even though you can't see it. You actually used to be able to see it, but they changed it for some reason.
Yes.
So
So similar to a button, where if you spawn in a button, you see the little object board above it with a little yellow dotted line. As Snake said, you can't see it for players, but there is an object board. Just think of it. There's just a board hovering above all of our heads in the same way, except we don't show them because it's the same for every player, so it would be a waste of chips. So the way that you set which chips is in that board
no, they're
is
all
you use
undefined now.
the player definition board. This is just like an example chip that will take, and you put your chips in it, you wire up whatever you want inside of the chip. It's just a circuit board, just like a regular circuit board. The chip's inside of it. And then you can configure it and you can turn it on for the room, and it will take that definition board and it'll copy it out for every player in the room, and it'll just put a copy of that above everybody's head, basically. And like the other components, like the button, for example, had pressed and released inside of it, there are special player-specific events that are available inside the player definition board, which Nug's going to get to now.
All right, so here are the player-specific chips. We'll start over here on the far left. Starting off, we have player grabbed object and player released object. And you'll notice it only outputs the object the player grabbed, not the player. So you're probably wondering, how do you know what player grabbed it? Well, like Will was saying, every single player has their own object definition board. And much like how on a button, if you put down a self chip, you can get the button itself. And a player definition board, well, this is really where my keyboard's moving my hand. This self chip will always output the player, and this is like linked with this event. And this event, I'm like 90% sure goes off for everybody in the room. So if you want it to specify for only one player, then you would get the self and then check if the self is the local player. Does that make sense? Those two events, and that what I just said will apply for all of these with the player. All right. So the next two events we have are local player started interaction, completed interaction, and canceled interaction. This is like a interaction volume, but on players. There are two chips that if I place, you're not going to be able to see, I don't think. So let me put them outside of the board. I'm pretty sure they're called local player set interaction. And no, I'm not going to guess. Let me just find it. Oh, it's enable and disable. So here we have, is that in something? Yeah, do man stop editing the board. Here are the two chips for player interactions. And this is all local. So like I would not be able to set a player interaction for you because there's no port unless you use events. If that's what you're raising your hands for,
So,
Will.
You should
Yeah.
explain what player definitions or what player interactions are.
Oh, yeah. So here, what's a better way to show you than to actually do it? So I'm gonna put this button down and put this here. So now there should be a player definition on everyone. If you're holding out your maker pen, you might notice there was an error just then. That's because you can't do it on a local player. Oh, and I just did it on the local player. That's why. Let me get all. Did we ever teach for each?
I don't
Will?
think we've done loops yet, no.
All right. You guys will be fine with this one error message, so I'm not gonna bother filtering it. Unless, will that break it? That might break. I'm gonna filter it. All right. So if I wire that all up, Now, if you go up to a player and hold your hand out to them, you'll notice there's a green outline around them, right? And it's kind of like when you point at a player, if you're on screen, and you see you now click on them, and you can even have it say something. So I'll have it just say hello, and I'll set the duration to 1 second. It sounds like Will wants to say something.
This basically
so
turns
go-
the player, like the player that you activate it for, into an interaction volume where you can click on them and run some sort of circuitry once you've clicked on them. And you'll know which player you're clicking on because it has a player port on the output.
That's pretty
Yeah,
cool.
so let's go over how to receive these player interaction events right after I disable them. Actually, I'll leave them on. Let me move this all over there.
Oh my gosh. Well, now I'm gonna do next time. We didn't make it so if you see someone check if
Alright.
they're grabbing you first.
Go back into the board. All right, so here are the events. Note this says local player, meaning this will only run for you as the local player, regardless of the player definition board. So I really have no clue why this is in the player definition board, but it is. So this outputs the player you clicked on. And much like an interaction volume, when you first start, like you start to hold on them, it'll output this first event. If you cancel before the time is up, assuming you put a time on the interaction, it'll put the canceled event. And if you hold it for the full duration, it'll output local player completed interaction. All right. Next, let's go down to these. I'm gonna summarize them. So hopefully you guys were paying attention earlier when we went over all the locomotion events. These are literally identical. They're all of the same events. The only difference is it won't output a player on it. It is just whoever's in that player definition board. So notice these aren't on player grounded. These are just on grounded or on jumped, on landed, you know. And the player is the self. If that, I don't think that's in here, but like if you put a self or get authority, you would get who jumped to whatever. And these events go off for everyone because they do. Only differences, I think weirdly, is wall run, is on player wall run one of the events outside? I don't, it might be. If it isn't, then it's a weird bug. But on player wall run started, I don't remember seeing it out of the board, but there it is. Or like, yeah, and we have wall climb started there twice. Okay, now let's go up to here. These are all of the melee events. So up top we have collision detection volume hit player. A collision detection volume is a gizmo or gadget. What do they call it? Component. That's what they're called. And if you go to circuits, no, if you go to components, under there you'll find the collision detection volume, which is in beta, and for some reason spawned really small. Hold on. All right, here it is. This is a collision detection volume. Once enabled, if someone's hand goes into this or something, it's like a trigger volume, but you're really supposed to use this for like custom swords and stuff. So you could put a collision detection volume on a swing handle, like clamp them together, and then enable when you start to swing and disable when you stop. And then that's how you would make like a custom sword. And actually, now I'm thinking about it, that might not be a bad example, Will, if you're thinking of something to make still. All right. Does everyone know what this does? Yep. Okay. Yeah. Going back into the player definition board. Under that we have event receiver, explosion, hit player. Once again, there's another component called explosion emitter, and this also goes off for the grenade. Does it, Will?
Explosion
Maybe.
should go off for grenade. Yeah.
Yeah, so for the prop grenade, explosion hit player, and this outputs who threw the grenade or who set off or whoever's authority over the explosion emitter. Explosive weapon, this is an object type, so this will output the object that like the grenade itself. Collision data is it holds the data from the collision. I think you already talked about that once, right?
The collision data, we might have covered this, but just to reiterate, it contains several different fields of relevant information for that collision instance. It contains the player or object that was hit. Usually one or both of those will be empty or invalid because either you're hitting an object or a player. It will contain the position of that impact. It will contain the distance from the thing that was hit to the thing that was being launched, and it will contain the normal. The normal is just like the perpendicular direction. You probably won't need that.
Does that make sense? Collision data? Okay. Then we have the body part. I'm pretty sure it goes head, torso, hands, or limbs. Now it's limbs. So with full body, it used to be hands. So now if it hits your limbs, so your legs, feet, hands, arms, that's 3, I want to say, but don't quote me on that. I pretty much never use body part. And then damage, it can be configured on the things, and that's what it outputs. All right, next let's go down to projectile hit player. Just like explosion hit player, it's just that, but for like the projectile launcher and like the gun props. All right, then we have melee hit player. That's like if a sword hits a player, like the prop sword, which I'm honestly surprised isn't combined with the collision detection volume, but it's not. So melee hit player is prop swords, and it shows the attacking player and stuff. All right, then coming over to here, we got these pretty new events that came out in the January update. Player took share camera photo, and this event's super cool because it shows you the position it was taken in, the direction it was taken in, and then the players in the photos and the objects in the photos. So I guess you could make a game with that. I wouldn't. You should probably make your own camera, but you could use the Rec Room one if you wanted. And then player uploaded public photo to RecNet. It doesn't say that, but that's what it does. If you click publish or upload to RecNet on your camera, this event will run. But importantly, it has to be a public photo. If you private upload the photo, this event will not go off. And we have player share camera spawn. Just the second your share camera comes into existence, that event will go off. And player share camera despawn. As soon as it gets despawn, it'll turn off. There's no way to tell if it's in a player's hand for some reason. All right, I think we covered all of the player definition events. I hope. And now let's go on to the example. Go for it, Will.
Okay, cool. So now that you've seen a bunch of events, let's build something with them. So one of the most common events that you'll see is event 30 Hertz, and it's just always running. And something you probably see in a lot of rooms is like you go to a room and everybody's name is like cycling through a rainbow. So that's a pretty cool effect. Let's build something like that. So first, you're going to want, and also we're going to make it so you can toggle the feature on and off. So first, let's take out the event receiver, This is just like the starting chip that will run anytime you need an event. It comes from the event receiver, and when I spawn it down, you'll see that it just says event receiver. There's no text underneath it, and there's an exec port. This will never run because it's not currently configured to anything. So I'm going to configure it. And when I do that, there is a drop down where I can just pick from the list of events. This is just how you select the event in any event receiver. It'll automatically only show you the ones that are like available in your scope. So I've selected event 30 Hertz. This type of event is available everywhere in any circuit ever. So you don't have to worry about like where you are when you want to take this out. And I'm gonna go into things not directly related to events, just to like show you like how you plug these things into other systems. So for instance, if you want to make like an RGB, like rainbow cycling system, a good way to do that is with the HSV. HSV stands for hue, saturation, and value. That's just how you represent, or at least one way to represent color. And we want to cycle the hue. So if you imagine a rainbow going from like red all the way through the end and then back again, that's the hue, like going between 0 and 1 and then back again. So let's take out the HSV to color chip. Cool. So this has hue, saturation, and value. You'll see that by default, the hue is automatically 0 and saturation value are both 1. That's good. That's just what we want it. But we want the hue to increase over time. And the best way to make it increase over time is to tie it to the actual time itself. So let's get a relatively new chip called Instance Lifetime. This will just tell you how long the room session you're currently in has been like in existence for in seconds as a float.
This is
that's not the one I wanted.
This is in beta, by the way.
Yeah, for now. It'll probably come out relatively soon. So you can see it's blue. It's a float. So this room has been up for 3,887 seconds. So if I just wire that into hue directly, that's just going to give me red like every time, no matter how high this value gets, because hue is expecting a number between 0 and 1, and 1 is red, and when you get above that, it's just always red. Clamp this basically, but if we just use clamp, like the actual literal clamp chip, it will just be 1. But so we don't exactly want that either. What we do want is something we went over earlier called the remainder. So let's take that out. Modular works as well. So this will now, if I do remainder 1 on the second port. Cool, so this is constantly giving me a value between 0 and 1. So that's a little bit better. Let me hook this up to a light so you can get a good visualization of like what color we're actually dealing with here. So I'm just going to wire up this color into the color port, and then 30 Hertz is always running. First, I'm going to unsync it so we don't break net heat. Cool. Let's wire 30 Hertz up in set color, and you can see it's cycling through a rainbow, right? That's pretty cool. Just a tips, and we're already doing that. But it's going kind of fast. So let's divide the time by let's say 4 to make it 4 times slower, and we want that to go right in between lifetime, instance lifetime, and remainder. We're going to divide it by 4, so let's type in that 4. And then wire that back up, and you'll see that slowed it down 4 times. So that looks a little bit better. Cool, but we don't actually want to use a light. We want to set it to players' names. So let's take out the set name tag color chip, player set name color. Let me pull this out here. And so this takes a player port and a color and an exec. So we don't want to overload networking by running it for everybody. So I'm going to configure it. And there's a toggle on it. Turn off sync. Sync like is a network concept. We'll get to that more tomorrow. You generally shouldn't have to worry about it too much today. But we do still want it to run for everybody in the room. So let's take out a get all players chip. And we've used this one before. This just gives you a list of all the players in the room. And something we haven't used before is a for each chip. So let me take that one out. It's just called for each, 2 words. And I'm going to hook this up into the get all players. You'll see this takes a list. It takes an execution input, has a loop execution output, an item output, and a done. So you're probably wondering why it has 2 execution outputs. Basically what this does is when you run it here, it will take this list of items, and for every item in the list, for each item in the list, it will run this loop exec, and it will set item to that value in the list. So this will run, it'll run loop and set item at one point to every player in the room currently, because that's what I have it connected. This is a list of players, so this item port will always be of the type player, since that's what I have it connected to. And then when that's done, it'll run done. So this looks like what we want to set players' names. So let's hook up loop into set player name.
40?
Okay. Anyway, I think most of us are back, so let's keep going. So we're setting the player name for every player in the room. We have get all players. We loop through them all for each, and then for each player in the room, we're setting the name tag color to whatever color we have on this port here. So let's hook that up to what we have up here coming out of the HSV to color. So right now that's just the same color we have going into this light. So if I just hook that up to the 30 hertz, instead of going on the light, I put it on the for each. If you look at everybody's names in the room, you'll see they're cycling through a cool little rainbow effect. Cool. So let's hook this up onto a toggle.
To a regular button. I think it was showing something with it. We have this button, and I'll just set this variable over here, and on the pressed event, I'll go into the variable, and we'll grab a not chip, which is just the opposite of what's in the bool variable, because remember, it can only be true or false. So now every time I click this, the output of it switches from false to true and true to false. Yeah. All right. Then all we're going to do is add an if chip right after the event. And so if this variable is true, then it'll run the for each. And so right now you can see all of our names are just red, but now when I click this, it will now become rainbow. And when I click it, it stops. And if we want to add an extra layer to it, we can add another for each. And another if chip. And so then after we set the variable, if it is false, then we will reset all the player names. So let me, what is it? Player.
Who has that? Dude,
Whoever's
hey.
doing that, please cut it out.
Can you turn off those circuits? Because there's people.
Is something happening? I didn't hear it.
Velocity stuff. Continue.
I actually have no clue what the chip is called. Dude, can you ask Will? Oh, never mind. I got it. Player reset name color. Just put that right in there. So now think of this as like even though these are related circuits, they're kind of separate. So I'm just gonna lower it. So now when this is on, all of our names are rainbow, and when it's off, it just resets to the default colors for all of us. Does that make sense? How that works? Any questions?
Why is it so laggy?
You're lagging.
No, like why does it lag everyone
Is
when you do it?
is this every time I toggle this? Is this lagging you guys?
Not for me.
No.
Turn it off.
I mean, like
A
I'm
little
just
bit,
talking
yeah.
about like the net
A little
and
bit.
stuff. Like it just fires up
I'm good.
whenever I try to do the
Like
No,
just
it
a smart
doesn't.
slight amount.
I'm not
Who's been
noticing
blabbering on
anything.
about? I'm not
And
seeing
this is
anything going on.
unsynced, so the
glitched.
networking isn't going up at all. That's super weird.
I'm glitched.
So I'm just not gonna turn it on. I'm gonna get rid of this. Yeah. Did Will ever think of something for them to build, or no? While we wait, Ducky, Ducky, I feel bad. Do you want to teach something? I can give you something.
I don't really mind. Doesn't matter to me. I don't think there's really anything, to be honest.
Can you show them how to make like a tileable gun system where when they pick it up, it sends an event and it goes to one system, and when they fire it, it goes to one system?
So like using the custom events, you mean?
Yeah.
Do you care what you want it to do?
Like, just do like a custom gun. So when they pick it up, it sends the projectile launcher and then saves it. And then when they fire, it sends an event and separately it'll fire that projectile launcher. So the only thing in the object board is like the events, you know?
Maybe. Explaining it a little smidgen weird.
Okay, I can do it
It
then.
is weird. I'm not sure.
All right,
I know what
here
you're saying, but I was exactly.
here is a
He's back.
here's a super easy way to make like a tileable system for stuff. I'm gonna use a trigger handle. Hold on. All right. Let me freeze this. Something up with the instance?
Weird.
That's not supposed to happen.
Cool though. I'm
What's happening, Snug?
The gun's not
Can you-
falling.
Oh, yeah, that's weird.
Okay, new
Pretty
new
strange.
plan. Man, go take a picture of the attendance. We're gonna go to a new instance.
I can just refresh it on the admin side.
Yeah, but make sure you get the photo. Click it again. Do. And yeah, refresh it. Sorry about the inconvenience, everyone. Right.
Which it's not.
I don't.
Wait,
I missed something.
Okay.
What's happening?
this still. It's not doing it for me.
Guys, we did it.
We're in a fresh instance. Hopefully, everything works. That's the dream.
You get it.
So, yeah.
It is rec room.
Hold on. Ducky, do you understand the gun thing I'm saying? You can teach it however you want. Just the idea is like
It's not. Maybe we should do
Oh,
that as the
enemies while
example
flying.
that the people work on.
What?
Get your collision out of here.
Oh, cool. Yeah, yeah.
So you want the trigger handle to only be events, so you'd have your receiver, you send
Have
the
like the
event,
core
just
logic for it
fire the
outside
gun.
of the handles.
Alright. I mean,
I'm not sure.
yeah, I can do that.
Yeah,
I hate this
don't
keyboard
have that
thing.
saved.
Sorry, clipboard, I'm sorry.
all right. So Ducky is gonna teach you guys a super great way to save chips in maps where you have a lot of the same thing, and I highly recommend you do this and pay attention because we're gonna have you make something pretty similar to what he's about to show you. Let me put your screen back, dude, man. Yeah.
Alright. So you could either do this with the trigger handle or gun handle. I'm gonna do mine with the trigger handle. Is there an animation over there that freezes it? Or is it?
You can do this with any object in the game. It's not
Yeah,
specific.
I'm just gonna do it with the trigger handle. You can do it with a button or whatever can really send an execution or event. It's up to you. I'm just gonna do a trigger handle. Alright, we're gonna get a projectile launcher as well. And as well, same thing as this, it doesn't have to be a projectile launcher. But for this, we're gonna use a projectile launcher. Alrighty. We gotta define a few events here. Which usually you do that first, generally speaking, but kind of up to you. You put the senders down first. I'm just going to define a few things first. So what we want to do is we want to fire an event whenever we press the trigger handle. And actually I think it's just that. Let me fire it. And you can do this for all the other events too on this. So we just want to add a port on the event definition to be a player. So that's just going to be the player who shot our gun here. I'm just gonna player. Yeah, that's just player. All right. I'm going to name that to be fired here. Alrighty. So this is a custom event, and to send custom events, we need obviously, like Snug was saying, an event sender, and we'll also get an event receiver over here. You could do this inside the board as well. I'm just going to show you outside so you can watch, but you could do this inside the board. You just edit it and you can just delete. Yeah, just put it where the output would be. But I'm going to do it outside for the sake of displaying it to you. Oh. Oh. Alrighty. So why would we need that?
So you know what projectile launcher to shoot from.
All right. So we're also just going to add just a
You don't
Recrum
need the player.
object. All right, yeah. Just change that to Recrum object.
And I would
Is it a
do
projectile?
projectile launcher so you can know specific, like so you don't have to convert it to a projectile launcher.
All right. All right. So in the event definition, just add projectile launcher type. It's kind of far down. It'll take you a second to find that.
Really annoyingly, on the new like circuit board UI, you can actually search at ports, which is super useful. But the annoying thing is you can't search ports on events yet for some reason.
Yeah,
hopefully
it's
soon.
kind of annoying. All right. I'm just gonna bring that over there because we're gonna clamp that down. Forgot to detach these. Oops. I always recommend detaching your like object boards. You just configure that. Scroll down a little bit. You don't even have to. It's there. Just click detach. The drop down. Follow orbit. Attach and detach. Just so you know your wiring doesn't go all over the place. All right. So we're going to configure these to that event that you just made. Mine is fired. And configure that as well. Your event receiver. A lot of events. Gotta find it here. Top. Yeah. Alrighty. Oh. Alright. So see the organization here.
Remove the excess ports.
Yeah. On the both of them, or just
You can remove all the ports from the projectile launcher.
yeah. You want me to do that to the trigger handle though too?
Yeah, delete the extra ones. Is there a reason you're doing released?
Oh, I think it just hooked up automatically when I placed it down.
That's weird.
Alright. Yeah, it does that. Sorry, I didn't mean to hook that up like that. It just when you place something down, sometimes it'll hook up to whatever you're kind of hovering over. Most of the time it's wrong, but sometimes it's right. Alright, so on this you can just delete all of that. You don't really need that. And on this, you could also just delete those, unless you want certain ones, but we're not going to do that. So I'm just going to delete all of them, but primary action rest here.
Screeny. What the heck?
Alright. You could do that in the board too, because the chips still stay, but for this, it doesn't really matter. But you should. Alright, so pretty much you could clone this as many times as you want. You just have to identify your projectile launcher and what execution's firing it. We're going to clamp these together in a second. Should probably just do that now. So we're just using a piston. Use whatever clamp method you want to. It's pretty easy to clamp it. You know, bottom part to the thing you're picking up. Everything else to the top pin there. But now, whenever we fire this event, your projectile, which is just this, will be identified and will send to our receiver here. And there's a chip, projectile launcher, fire projectile. Is there one for forward or is it just fire forward? Does need a direction. Is there a fire forward one? Usually I don't use.
Can I put this stuff on the floor now?
Is there not a fire forward?
No.
They're over there doing something. I don't think they have a fire forward. They probably do, but I don't see it. All right. So because of that, we're just gonna add one more port. I swear there was a fire forward, but I guess that's just on the. Actually, I just need one. See this? Give me 1 second. I just gotta see if this is. All right. Yeah. No, there's no fire forward. So we do have to add one more port here. Oh, I just deleted it. All right.
No, you don't.
Oops. I have my not
No, you
configured to
don't.
allow.
No,
You're doing
just
great.
Get the forward. Just get the forward of the projectile launcher.
Mm,
Direction.
That would be the same thing, yeah.
Say
So,
that.
let's
though.
see. All right. So, sorry. I accidentally deleted everything, so, or deleted the chip, so. All right. Don't mind what I just did. Instead we can just get the forward vector, which is just, you have your red, your green, red, and blue. Your blue arrow there is your forward vector. So let me just get forward vector of our projectile launcher that we identified over there. All right. That's just the vector chip. I don't remember us. No, we didn't do those yet. Put one right there. So our forward vector is the direction, so that's just the direction this is facing. Our target is our projectile, and when we fire it, when we fire that event, this will fire. So pretty basic. Without an event, but if you had many of these,
Use me.
you wouldn't have to do any of that. Oh yeah, getting shot at.
That was fine.
What the hell?
Yeah, no, but you could just have this. You can just clone this small setup here. So if you had, this is a case scenario you wouldn't really do this for, but if you had a big circuit connected to it, like whatever, like this is a basic gun, but if you had something more complicated, that's when you'd probably use this. But if you just have this, you could probably just hook up your fire to fire forward or whatever. It'd do the same thing. All right. Yeah, pretty easy custom event setup here. Does that all make sense? Sorry if I was a little bit with that. Is that all good? Pretty. Sorry to bore you, but all right. Yeah.
That was awesome. Thank you.
Let me get out of the way now.
Look at this. This is so good. What I did, in Spin the Bottle, there's the death sound, the new death sound effects. Well, it's not out yet. The update's
I'll just move that over yonder here.
and this is the picture.
And not, oh,
I also, okay, there goes that picture. I
Oh,
also
oh.
have other ones.
I don't know what you're doing.
Does it sound better? No.
Holy.
I meant to go to the gym, but accidentally found myself at my favorite restaurant.
Okay, so did that make sense? I hope. No.
Yep.
I got a lot of yeses and I got one no.
An ish.
Uh,
I'll give you an ish.
Ish. Well, hopefully we can add to that because that's gonna be your example. So, what's something related to that for the example? That's not a gun. Do I got nothing. Ducky, what's an example they can do?
I think. Events.
Do you like my beautiful masterpiece?
Mm.
Um. Yeah. Okay.
How long did it take it? I want to buy it. Where did it go? I just dropped through it.
We're gonna ask you to do literally the exact same thing. The only difference is just use an emitter and have it shoot confetti, or you can do the exact same thing and just add something special to it. It's really up to you on what you want to do. We got nothing, but the important thing is that it's using events, and I want you to have 2 or more trigger handles or whatever that goes to like one central system of circuits. So one set of circuits, but 2 handles, and they both reference the same circuits. If you need me to specify more, say if that made sense, go find a spot and start working on it.
You want 2 triggers for that's doing the same thing? You just want them on separate.
Yes. Yeah, so we
Why
want them
would
to
we need two?
because the
Okay.
idea is like think of it as like every player could have their own or something, but then instead of having to have a ton of the exact same circuits, they just all reference the same ones.
Oh, okay.
I'm gonna lower my voice so y'all are gonna have to come closer. All right.